It was the dawn of the third age of mankind, 10 years after the Earth-Minbari War. The Babylon Project was a dream given form. Its goal? To prevent another war by creating a place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully. It's a port of call, home away from home, for diplomats, hustlers, entrepreneurs, and wanderers. Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night. It can be a dangerous place, but it's our last best hope for peace. This is the story of the Babylon Station. The year is 2258. The name of the place is Babylon 5.
They're coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara.
All right, so welcome to another exciting, tantalizing episode of Schreck Talk.
Are those the words we're going to use for it? I don't know.
That's what we're going to do for this.
Yeah,
one.
we're gonna reach out and say that that's how awesome it is. Ugh.
Yeah.
Wow, we're gutsy.
So we got a really good episode today. This is the episode when we were talking about getting back into Schreck Talk and creating some more episodes. This is what I wanted to do. Because in the last 2 years, this is the thing that I've been the most excited about. How do you feel about Babylon 5?
You asking me?
Yes.
I would say it's a show that I've grown quickly to love. It's one of them things you're like, you wish you hadn't been so late to the party. That's about the best way to describe it.
I mean, we're talking about a show that came out in 1994. All right, so we're sitting here 23 years later. And we just now kind of got into it and fell in love with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen a couple episodes randomly here when I was younger, but I was into Star Trek. I was never really just able to, and I caught randomly, and that's hard to get into a show that way when you don't know, and there's no options for buying it or anything like that.
Especially with this type of show, which is a very, very serialized show. It's not episodic like Star Trek. You kind of have to watch how the show's going to pick up on what is happening. I mean, it's individualized. Each episode is episodic, but there is an overarching storyline that you need to kind of follow.
And even in this season, where I feel it is the word, like the most apparent that it's individualized and serialized, it's still quite a bit going on in the story arc.
So, well, kind of just to tell you how I got into Babylon 5, I had heard about it like you when I was younger. I actually went to a Star Trek convention, and Stephen Furst was there, and I feel
gone now.
He's gone now. He just passed away recently. But he plays, one of our characters on our show, and when I went to the convention, I only knew him from Animal House, and I look back now and I was like, I wish I would have known him from Babylon 5. I have an Animal House autograph for him. It's like a picture of Animal House. I wish it would have been in Babylon 5.
And it was already over at that point, and you missed out. But that's the way life works sometimes.
But a few years ago, our mother for Christmas had did this little, TV season kind of thing, and I ended up getting Crusade. And when I looked at Crusade, it was an interesting sci-fi show. It fit perfectly for who I was. But when I was looking at it, I was like, wait a second. I did some research and I realized that this was just a spin-off show of Babylon 5. And I had known Babylon 5, obviously, but I had looked up some stuff on it, and people were talking about how amazing, the greatest science fiction show of all time, Babylon 5 was. And, I decided before I got into Crusade, I had to give Babylon 5 a shot. So I went to Hastings, now closed. Let's take a moment of silence for Hastings.
In a moment.
And I picked up the first season for like $10. Took it home. It took a while for me to watch this first season. It's like 22 episodes, I think. 22. And, it took me about 2.5 months to get through the 22 episodes.
That's a long time.
Yeah, but I have to say, after the 22 episodes when I started Season 2, I flew through Season 2, 3, 4, and 5 in about the same amount of time.
Yeah, and that's a rough way to start this too, talking about it, because that's what we're here to talk about. Is the first season.
Yeah.
So
we're going to just kind of go into the first season. Let me just kind of give you an idea. This show aired from January to October 1994. Like I said, it was consisted of 22 episodes.
January to October. That's an interesting run. I like that.
Well, and they were on a network that doesn't exist anymore. And the second to last episode actually took place in July. And because of the way the channel worked, budget constraints and stuff like that, the final episode wasn't shown until October. So there was a big, huge difference on that. Now, the show was created by Joe Michael Straczynski, or as people just call him, JMS. So from here on out, we're just going to call him JMS. 12 of the episodes of that season were written by JMS exclusively. And he had a couple of extra writers in there. The most popular one would be DC Fontana. She was famous from the original Star Trek series. She wrote 2 episodes in that first season. Do you have anything to say about either one of them?
We're just getting into the basic facts of the show. I'm ready to talk about it.
All right, so let's just talk about it.
Well, you want to set up the premise of the show?
Well, we kind of already did with the little intro that we had there.
Yeah, I mean there's a bunch going on. It's very much a story about people trying to be diplomatic. It's basically the station is Earth space station where
it's the United Nations in space.
Yeah, essentially, we're trying to have all these different races. There's a lot of backstory, just to give you a little bit, one of the races that we're involved with, we had a war with 10 years ago where they, there was...
Okay, well, let's go through the races. So there's 5 main races.
Yeah.
The humans.
Humans, we don't need to discuss that.
Yeah, represented by Earth Alliance.
They're the main players in the show.
Obviously.
The human characters are surrogates.
And just by the name of it, Babylon... is an America is a human name, so obviously the show, Babylon 5 was created by the humans. But then let's go to the second race, the Centauri.
The Centauri, yeah, I'm not one of my favorite races. I believe you're a big fan of them.
My favorite race.
We have the Centauri, who they were the first race we met when we went out into space, but they have a kind of checkered past where they were occupying another race. And they're very, I don't know what's a good word to describe. They're boisterous.
Yeah, they're the Tudors, or the French Renaissance period kind of aliens. That's how their society kind of is. They have it's called the Centauri Republic, but it's not really a republic. It's more of a monarchy. You've got a king or an emperor, and a lot of different people. Who are, they dress very flamboyantly,
have crazy hair.
Crazy hair. That's
they
the
look
most
very much
distinguishing
like
fact
humans.
about them.
They have some. Yeah, they look like very much like humans, but they have canine teeth. I believe is what makes them the main difference, and obviously the hair. And the women are bald.
And they're crazy genitalia. But you will find that out if you watch this season. So then our second race, the one that you were starting to talk about, was the Minbari. They are the ones that like I said in the intro, the Earth-Minbari War took place about 10 years before this period. So it's a race that we're not really, we don't really, at the start of the show, we don't know what happened in that war. Did we win the war? Did we lose the war? What went on there?
Yeah, and it's complicated because now we're allies with them, and but there's still a lot we don't know about each other. This ends up being my personal favorite race in the show of all the races. So definitely you'll hear more about them. And the next race after that, as I kind of mentioned during talking about the Centauri, they had subjugated another race and conquered their planet, and that would be the Narn. Narn are a very interesting race. They're they're very much in heavy makeup more than the Minbari.
They're kind of a reptilian-like species.
I would say that's a good way to describe it. They have a lot of spots. Very.
By the way, the Minbari, big hair tells you that they're a Centauri. The bones on the head, the boneheads, tell you that they're the Minbari, and the Narn look like reptiles.
Yeah, I'd say that's the big way to describe it. And then, the Narn, there's not, at this point we don't know much. They seem very aggressive. We don't know much about them. except the fact that they were dominated by the Centauri for so long and have been free for a little bit now from their rule.
Yeah, I think they'd ruled them for 100 years.
And they've been free for like 20 or 30 or 50.
Yeah, not very long, and there's still a lot of animosity in there. Sets up some good storylines. And then the last of the major races that we get is the Vorlons.
And the Vorlons are basically the big mystery.
They're mysterious. They're the whole first season until the very end of the second season. You kind of don't have an idea about you don't really understand anything about the Vorlons until that point.
Yeah, they'll become a very important part of the story.
And like I said, you got the humans, the big-haired Centauri, the bonehead Minbari, the reptilian Narns, and then the Vorlons look like robots. They have what's called encounter suits. You don't know why they have it, but they look like giant robots.
And basically, they're the most powerful of all the races. That's established pretty early on.
Well, and mystery and power go hand in hand.
I agree.
So that's kind of where we set up. There's also the non-aligned worlds, which have a lot of different races, but you don't really get to know them a whole lot.
Not at this point. I think you'll start to get to know a few of the races.
You do.
As the show goes along, but for the most part, they're there. They're part of the alliance that all these people on the station have. There's this alliance where we have a council discussing how to work out, basically, the UN.
Yeah, it's very much a UN. You have the non-aligned worlds, and then sitting atop, you have the humans, the Centauri, the Minbari, the Vorlons, and the Narn, who are like the Security Council.
Yeah.
And
they're the big players.
They're the big
Their
players.
votes are each of their votes is equal to all the other votes.
Yes. So that's kind of setting the stage for you. And then we have, let's just kind of go through our cast real quick. Tell me what you think about this person and what this character. Give a brief description of the character and what you think about him. So Jeffrey Sinclair, played by Michael O'Hare.
Wow.
He's our lead.
He is our lead, and talk about wooden. As an actor, does not have very much range. It really takes a while to warm up to him, just because he is so poorly portrayed. As something you may hear me say a little bit throughout the first season, one of the first problems starts with your lead. He's subpar.
Yeah, and like something important that you did say, that he grows on you. When you first start out the series, it's not very good with Sinclair. Commander Sinclair is the leader of this. He's got to work all this stuff out, and he does feel a little bit wooden. And there's especially a lot of stuff that feels wooden with him. And he seems to do the worst with me when he's trying to be the action hero kind of guy. When he's fighting different disputes between the races, he seems better off. It seems to be more in Michael O'Hare's wheelhouse when he's doing the political stuff as opposed to the action hero kind of stuff. But he does grow on you, and by the end of the season, you do enjoy Sinclair to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching something the other day, one of the episodes, and there's a great scene he has where he's talking to a Minbari. Don't want to give too much away, but it's a great scene where it actually ends up being pretty important in the show. But he's talking to him, and he's just got this like wise, and the Minbari ends up like they have some.
I think he says something about the effect that you sound like a Minbari,
yeah.
Or you would make a good Minbari.
Yeah, you know the scene. Yeah, it's a great scene. So that's where he's best. Definitely not as good when they're having and the whole action scenes don't really work in a lot of this first season.
No, it's kind of that Captain Kirk thing, the commander on the front lines of these major issues. It just doesn't feel right. So then our next character is Susan Ivanova, played by Claudia Christian.
I'm familiar with Claudia Christian from The Hidden and from this movie called Arena, so I kind of knew who she was.
Love Arena.
Yeah.
There's some Star Trek Deep Space Nine alums in there, Gul Dukat and Armin Sherman.
Oh,
Quark.
yeah. Great stuff, and I was familiar from her with her. Again, I think the human characters, for me, don't fare as well in the show, but she's good. Obviously, much better portrayal than we have from Michael O'Hare. She's a better actor. I don't really like the character that much at the beginning. She grows again. She'll grow. This season is very much characters
about
don't
growth.
They're very. stock characters when the show starts off, like any show like this, and you have to build on them, and she does. Even by the end of the first season, she
once we
great.
get to the one character, there's only one character I felt that right from the beginning was good. Okay, there was another character that was sort of good, but he's a completely different character by the end of the first season, or even like 5 episodes into the first season. So you don't really. But we'll get to that. But Claudia Christian playing Susan Ivanova, probably my favorite human character. You kind of hit the nail on the head when you said the human characters are really the good part of Babylon 5. But I think in the first season especially, she's the best character. And then we get our next human character. The next main one is going to be Michael Garibaldi, played by Jerry Doyle. He's kind of your everyman. He's like the Bruce Willis. He's even got the bald head like Bruce Willis. He is just, he's your security chief, and he's kind of, there involved in everything, but he's the everyman that you can kind of relate to. I didn't feel that he was very good in the first season either. He got better as the season went on, and definitely as the show went on, he got better. But he wasn't a good character.
You ever notice that the security chief characters always seem to know everything that's going on? It's like, wait, how does every security chief everywhere seem to know all the back dealings?
Worf never did.
Yeah.
But he was still the best character in the show.
That's debatable, but yeah, he's okay. He's not the worst character in the show by any means. His acting does get better. He struggles for sure, but he's okay. He's definitely better than probably than probably Michael O'Hare for sure. And the next character we're going to talk about, let's go ahead and just move on to the Doctor.
Played by Stephen Franklin, played by Richard Biggs.
Richard Biggs. And he almost struggles as much as Michael O'Hare. He's hard. He doesn't get much to work with. Maybe it's not his fault. Maybe he just suffered because he didn't have very many good episodes. Even the good episode he got, which I know is one of your things, was really poorly done. And
He's kind of the conscience of the show. They've often referred to him as that. If you hear about the Babylon 5 curse, a lot of these actors are dead, and they died fairly young, in their 50s or early 60s. And he's one of the ones. He died when he was in his 40s. But they said when they lost him, he was the conscience of the show. And I kind of do feel that way. He was a good character. He had some good episodes, but overall there was no greatness from him as a character anyway. He had some great episodes, but no greatness as a character.
He had one good one in this season, in my opinion. But as an actor, he didn't really wow me. He's kind of there. At least he doesn't generally overact or anything like that, so that's good.
All right. So that's kind of that. That's all of our. Well, there's one more human character. Doesn't have a whole lot to talk about. Talia Winters, played by Andrea Thompson. She is human.
I don't know. They're not like us. They're different.
No, she's a telepath.
Yeah, they're not normal.
They're normal.
No,
they're not normal.
We have to keep them.
But they're humans.
We have to keep them separate from us.
So this plays into the whole show. There's the telepaths, and they are human, and they developed over the last couple hundred years. And there's something called the Psi Corps, which people who are telepaths either have to be part of, or you really don't get to be able to live your life.
Nope. And she's okay. She's a commercial telepath. Her job is to mediate like business dealings and things like that. She's like not really a main character. She's kind of a secondary, like a regular who's secondary.
Yeah. So we'll kind of let's move on from the human characters then, and let's go into our first.
Oh, you mean where we can get into the good part of what makes the show so great?
The show
at this stage.
Yeah, at this stage, the ambassadors are huge. And the 3 ambassadors that are the main characters on the show, even so much, the 4 are really the driving force of this show. And the first one, I'm going to let you take this one. Ms. Bonehead, Delenn, played by Mira Furlan.
The best character in the show, in my opinion.
In your opinion.
Is Armin Bari. She is... Well, I mean, how much should I be giving away about the character here? She's the ambassador for the Minbari people on board the station. She is very cordial. She's kind of mysterious, like all of the. From the perspective of the human character, she's kind of mysterious, like all the ambassadors are. She's the one who probably relates closest to our lead character, particularly. Sinclair is the main one who interacts with these characters, with the ambassadors, and she has the best relationship with him.
Okay. I know you love this character so much. Do you want to say anything more about her?
I like the character because she's so relatable. Like, she has a very strong presence. She's very religious. She's very polite.
Something we didn't discuss about the Minbari. There's 3 casts of the Minbari. There's the religious caste, the warrior caste, and the worker caste. And she is part of the religious caste. So that is it, and it really doesn't come into effect in this first season. And you'll find that a lot of things are like that. But it's very important for her character development. She is part of the religious caste, so she is somebody who's very, very, centered on religion and spirituality, the universe, and what makes it tick, faith, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't know though. I rate her on one of my all-time favorite characters in any television show, not just Babylon 5, obviously my favorite character in the show. And I really like that fact about her. And speaking of it, since we're talking about each of these ambassadors and stuff, I also want to bring up how each one has a attaché, I believe is the word they use in the show, which is their assistant that helps them. And we meet hers I think it's like 5 episodes into the show, played by the actor Bill Mumy.
Hers is the last one we meet.
Mummy.
Yeah,
the last one.
When I told this to Dad, I was like, oh, he was the kid from the original Lost in Space. He's like, oh, little Billy Mumy?
Yes.
Bill Mumy. He's an adult now. Goes by Bill.
Plays the character of Lanier, and he'll become important he's arguably the most important. No,
he's second most important.
Yeah. The attachés help out. They have roles that will become very important. In the first season, they're kind of there as the assistant to our ambassador.
What they are is originally, as they were created, was they were trapdoors. JMS realized that when he was writing the show, that because of the way shows work and stuff like that, that a character may not have, the contract or be willing to come back, that he would have to write that character out. And then he came up with this idea of trapdoors with all of his characters, and all the attachés were trapdoors for the main characters. And Lanier is the trapdoor for Delenn. Just in case she was to ever leave the show, he would pick up her storyline from there.
And that's beautiful because he develops his own storyline that becomes very integral to the story arc.
Definitely.
And for me, the Minbari are my favorite race. They're very, you could call them the elder, wiser race that's been around. But they have their own problems like any race does. Any people, any species, however you want to describe it. And I really like the way these two characters are presented as individuals and as a joined group, like from the same. They are a representation of the species. Obviously, we'll meet other characters as it goes along, but these are the two that we know and who best represent it.
Yeah, and I remember I just watched this with my wife, and we were going through the show, and she's actually the only one who's been kind of willing to watch the episodes, and we finished the first season with her, so I was able to rate all the episodes and everything like that. And it took forever to get to Lanier. I was like waiting for it. I'm like, when's Lanier going to come in? When's Lanier going to come in? And he takes forever to come into the show, and he's not really that present in the first season.
He comes
in very important.
He comes in one of my favorite episodes of the season, so I definitely remember it. It was number 5.
The Parliament of Dreams?
Parliament of Dreams with the ceremonies.
So then let's go to my favorite character in the show, the one that I think, like, right from the beginning, he's great. And that's going to be from the Centauri, our ambassador from them, was just going to be Londo Mollari, played by Peter Jurasik. Oh my gosh. I mean, even if you watch the, there's a pilot movie. Don't watch the pilot movie first. Watch the first episode of season 1. Eventually, you can go back to the pilot movie, The Gathering.
Give it a couple of seasons before you go back to the pilot.
But Peter Jurasik is awesome. And he starts out, this character is such a comedic character. He's so he's just kind of like, whatever, this is a backwoods assignment. I don't care. I'm going to drink. I'm going to gamble. I'm going to get with some women. I'm just going to have a good old time here. And that's when we meet him. Now, like every character in this show, he has a huge story arc. It's very important. And, when you meet him, that is the beginning of that story arc. It gets better and better and better.
In the first episode, they talk about stuff that's going to be very important to his character as it goes along. And the thing I like most about him is he, just like Delenn, represents his species very well. That's probably the best thing about most of the ambassadors is they're great for who they are as characters, and they're great representations of not the whole society, but certain parts.
Yeah, a big part of the society. How you view the society.
Yeah,
how somebody from the outside would view it.
Yeah.
And his attaché is Stephen First. Like I mentioned, I wish I'd had his autograph. And he's playing Vir Kodo, kind of this bumbling, stumbling idiot, kind of. The Centauri are kind of comedic. And Vir Kodo is a very comedic character when you meet him. He plays... Stephen First, if you don't know what I was saying, Animal House, he plays Flounder. So he plays a very Flounder-esque Centauri.
He's awkward. He's not as confident as Londo is. He's very much more of a modern age. There's some changes coming in the society. You can definitely see he has more forward thinking, however you want to think about progressive views for his society. But the main thing I would say is more reserved and awkward, uncomfortable about his character.
And he's a great character too, but again, with these attachés, you don't get a whole lot of them. They're built in as trapdoors. As the show goes on, they develop their own kind of very, very important story arcs. But in the very early on, you don't get a whole lot of that.
They're there for convenience. And these are the big two. There is a third one we're going to talk about. Not going to be important, really. These two, the first two, Lanier and Vir, are what matter.
Yeah. And then we get to our third main race, the Narn, and that's going to be played by our main character there is Jakaar, Andreas Castellanos, or Castellanos.
Hands down the best actor on the show.
Definitely. As much as I love Peter Jurassic playing Lando Malari, Andreas Castellanos
just from an actor perspective
is amazing.
He's fantastic.
And when Peter Jurassic, they are the best two actors.
Yes.
And when you get Peter Jurassic and Andreas Castellanos on the screen together, it's just magic.
They are like if you had to highlight one thing from the show over there, the combination, that buddy pair. We talk about buddy pairs all the time. In Star Trek we talk about how we have Spock and Kirk. In Next Generation, you can name any.
Geordi and Data.
Geordi and Data is the main one. In Deep Space Nine, we're talking about Julian Bashir and
Miles
O'Brien. So we have these combos, and this one is...
But they're not friends. They hate each other.
This is probably better than all of those.
Yeah, we discussed the Narn and Centauri. The Centauri had conquered the Narn and enslaved them for like 100 years. And the Narn have only been away for 20 or 30 years. And these species absolutely hate each other. And the play between Peter Jurassic as Londo and Andreas Castellanos as Jakaar is amazing, and it's one of the best parts about the show.
It's absolutely one of the best parts. I mean, for me, the story arc is what's going to come over, and as we make it further into the seasons, that'll become more of the conversation. But at this point, this is what draws you in. Like, even from the first time they interact, even when there's bad episodes that aren't to the standard the rest of the show's at, these two, whenever they interact, it's golden. And they just pull their A game out. Like, nobody else on set. Like, I'm talking about how Delenn's my favorite character. I love Mira Furlan as an actress in the show. But she just can't compete with these two.
No, definitely not. And this is kind of, when you first meet Jakaar, he is the stereotypical villain. You see him as the villain. And his arc, oh my gosh, man. As far as the show goes, I know we're only talking about season 1 here, but as far as the show goes, he has absolutely the best arc of any character.
Even by the end, you start to see it at the end of season 1.
Londo, I still love Londo's arc.
No, you're wrong. It's Jakaar.
Jakaar has an amazing arc. And then we get to his attaché, Natath. let's just say her name because that's about how important she is.
Yeah, she'll be here every now and again. I think we even see her in a little in the second season, maybe, but not going to be important. Play parts in the series at this point, but again, they're trying to find their footing. This character doesn't develop like the others do.
All right, so let's get into the show here.
Well, there's one character we didn't.
Did I skip a character?
Did we?
I don't think so.
Did we talk? Well, we didn't talk about the actor. I guess we did. Did we talk about the Vorlons?
Oh,
I guess we talked about Kosh.
We talked about the ambassador for.
But we didn't talk about
Kosh,
who is our representation of him. He's
very
in a kind of suit.
mysterious.
Yeah, he. There's no actor. It's a guy in a suit, which is not to underscore how much the character feels important to the story and unique in it, and you feel like there's a character there, but there's no specific person we could call out.
Yeah, and he just gives these. He pops up, gives these one-line little things like, I'm trying to think of one right now. I can't. But he just pops in and gives these one little line things here, very mysterious, kind of thing.
But there you go. Now we've covered that.
The avalanche has already started, something like that. He's like, "Can't you help?" And he's like, the pebble has already been dropped in the pond. The avalanche has already begun, or something like that.
Weird stuff. He's a weird guy.
So, kind of, Babylon 5 was a show that, from the very beginning, was it was a novel design for television.
Yeah, this was really ahead of its time. Now we think of serialized shows where they're having this idea of a continuing story, even though there may be individual moments that matter or don't matter. It comes back that over the time, the entire run of the show, things that might not have seemed relevant were relevant. If there was a vision, and even if sometimes you can tell it had to be stretched or connected in ways that maybe weren't always there, there was this mindset of this is where we're starting, this is where we're ending. And that was unique. That wasn't something that was common at that point.
Yeah, and I don't want to trash on Star Trek, but if you think about the Deep Space Nine episode called Hard Time, where basically Miles O'Brien, one of my favorite episodes of all time, where Miles O'Brien spends basically a lifetime in his head in prison and tortured and stuff like that, and at the end of the episode, all the stuff that he's gone through, and it's a great episode, doesn't matter after the next episode. And this is something that doesn't happen in B5. Now, when you look at the first season, which we will just say each season has a title. So the first season is Signs and Portents, which comes from the Bible. And this is very much giving you little clues and hints as to the future. And season 1 is about 25% arc, 75% standalone. And as the seasons increase, they change.
I don't know if I would go that far, but it is still like this. The arc matters more into the season arc than the entire story arc. There is 20. I would say yes. If you're saying there's 25% story arc to the main theme of the show, yes. But if you're saying we're not including the arcs that are only relevant to this season, which somewhat is something I want to mention. There's sometimes some things that they start, but they kind of just drop off because they realize it wasn't working, or they wanted to go a different direction with the show. You see that in this show, so I think there was more as I was going through these, preparing my notes. I noticed there was more to this season than I thought, but a lot of these stories just kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, there's only one major arc that doesn't have its beginning in this first season. And that's just because of an actor change that happened, and they had to take that story, and change it to another actor that came in. But every single major arc that's in that first season, it goes through the entire show. Well, I think, anyway. There's some minor things that happen here and there, but all of your major arcs have their very beginnings in the show.
Oh yeah,
in this first season.
Yeah, but there's some story
arcs. The very
that,
first episode
that had play that kind of like there's a story about these raiders. I don't care if I'm spoiling. I'm not spoiling too much because I'm not ruining episodes or anything. But there's a story arc of these raiders, and it plays into the show, and then it becomes unimportant very quickly. that was something.
Well, and if you listen to like JMS talk about it, the Raiders were just every time they needed a little bit of action in an episode, they would throw the Raiders in there.
It's like how when you start a show, like you think of Buffy, you think of Smallville. These shows, they have their monsters of the week to start off. But as the story arc goes, you develop the world, you develop what's going on, and this show is doing the exact same thing.
It does, that world building amazingly, and there's lines that pop up that you don't realize mean something until the 4th or 5th season. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, he had everything planned out from the very beginning because he wanted a novel for television, and each one of these seasons is a chapter, or each one of these episodes is a chapter.
Yeah, and you like one episode may have a small story about the Drazi, one of the non-aligned world races,
Yes.
and you get to know the Drazi. I was watching something.
Drazi are my favorite non-aligned race.
Yeah.
They have some good episodes.
I was watching about the Pakmarais getting their stomachs pumped the other day and stuff. Like, there's some cool things where you get to these characters that don't even matter, like, are consistently there later, and it matters how you've seen how their people act and react to things. It's going to play into something maybe later. You don't even realize it. And
yeah, because the Drazi really don't become important until like the 4th or 5th season. That their world becomes, and their place on the council or the non-aligned worlds doesn't become a factor until the 4th or 5th season. But you establish them in the very early beginning.
All the time. Yeah. And you see all these races.
They're always there.
Yeah, and I like that. It's something that is very true to a story about a space station where there's lots of different races. You're going to see these people constantly. You're going to see them interacting. They're always even in the background. If they're not important to the episode, you see them walk around the station. And they're consistent in their nature. When you get to know them, even if you don't get as much time with them as the main races, you get to know them. You're like, oh, that's how the Drazi act. That's how, like, all of that stuff comes into play. And I like that. It's just so hard for me talking about the first season because it struggles on the production side, I think. I don't think it's necessarily the stories weren't even there because there's some great ideas in a lot of these stories. A lot of these stories are like very unique, one alone ideas of like how this is a more like kind of like the old idea of Star Trek of let's tell a moral story, something that's awkward, something you'd see in a Twilight Zone, anything like that, and unique. But then it just kind of lands flat. A lot of those
and some of that is the production as well. I mean, it was a very, very cheap show. It did not have the production budget.
I mean, PTN
like a Star Trek
or something like that. I forgot what the network was.
PTEN, I think.
Something
it was.
like that. Yeah, that didn't. Who knew it? It was played through Fox. It wasn't even its own channel.
Yeah.
Where I was.
So I mean, but if you look at it, there's there's a few story arcs that come up, and they all have their beginning or their genesis in this story, even if they took place before, like in the episode Mind War, which is about the 6th episode in the season. It's based on something that has happened before, and this is really the genesis of the story, and it continues on until the very end of the series. And post-series, you don't even get a lot of the information.
Yeah, we have to get the world, because, again, we have to develop how did we come to this world? How did this come about? And you get that. It's like, what you can't just always accept, like, oh, it's, 200 and whatever years in the future, 300 years in the future, and we totally are, how we got from here to there doesn't matter. No, like, you kind of get it to, obviously, you're not going to fill in hundreds of years worth of history, but you're going to show us, like, what's the world we're living in, which is what develops a great show. We talk about the shows that are really popular nowadays.
Your Walking Dead, your Game of Thrones.
And it's all about the world being realistic, believable characters. And for a show that is kind of designed to be an episodic show, it does a fantastic job of making itself a serialized show. Like, that's a way ahead of its time.
Yeah, and you don't, I mean, and there's such a huge difference, I mean, between the second season and the first season. When you get to that second season, everything is so much better. I know we're only talking about the first season, but you got to understand that the first season, this was new. This whole, novel for TV, especially for science fiction. I mean, you had soap operas and stuff like that, but this was new for this kind of television. And, he didn't understand that you could just hit the ground running on some of these storylines. So he had a whole season basically of building up. where you introduce your characters, you introduce your storylines, you give the basic hints of it, but by the second season, you're hitting the ground running. And, the first season is hard to watch at some points, but it's essential to enjoying the show. You cannot get the full experience of Babylon 5 unless you watch the first season.
I think it makes you realize who the characters are. Because it was hard in the format it's in. It is definitely designed to have monsters of the week, things like that. And it's hard in that kind of format to build it. It takes more time than if you're doing one individual story as it is. Whereas like you look at these shows nowadays, they tell an all-encompassing story that's here's our whole season planned out, here's everything, all in each episode. And we're talking 10, 13 episodes, at most. Like this had 22. That's a lot of episodes. You have to have it. Like any of those shows of its era, it's going to have filler. And sometimes that's where it struggles. But there's so many episodes that are kind of filler episodes that have great, like I was saying, great morals, great ideas. Like we're going to present this concept, but we just don't have the production to pull it off. We don't have the actors necessarily to pull it off.
Well, and you find like the characters, they each have their own episode. Like Born to the Purple, the third episode in the season is a Londo story. It's to help you establish who Londo is and that character. And then you get something like Infection, which is a very much, I'm trying to remember Infection, but I'm pretty sure it's a Franklin episode.
It is Franklin. It's where his buddy comes in with the weapon.
So it helps you get Franklin. And then you have like a Mind War, which is all about Sinclair and
Talia.
Yeah. So you get those development, and each character has their own little episode and everything like that, where you get to build up their characters. But in between that, like one thing I love about like Arrested Development is that like jokes in the very first episode are jokes that come up, in the very last episode of the third season before the crap fourth season. And you get that in this show as well. In the first season, storylines that come up, that pop up, they get built up upon, and they're still going at the end of the show. Very important storylines.
Well, and the way the history plays in, like how we talked about the Minbari War, that was 10 years ago. There's a whole story arc with our lead character, Sinclair, and what happened with him during the Minbari War and things like that. That ends up playing a part into it. Like, all of these things that, like, history before we even come.
That's key stuff for Sinclair's story and for Delen's story. And for Earth as a whole.
And for the whole world we've built. And that's what's so great is you get that developed. I think we've both established, I don't know if we've ever, I'm sure we've mentioned it on something at some point. We love when we talk about the history in something. We're reading a book and they talk about something that happened thousands of years ago that plays in, like in the Sword of the True series or Lord of the Rings. Those kind of things are what we love.
That draws me in.
Yeah.
It puts me into the world.
And this is what it does. It establishes a history of how we got here and the motivations behind our characters. I remember watching In the Valley of Violence with our father, and we were talking about John Wick and how John Wick is this crazy action film which has all these really cool scenes, but at the end of the day you don't really care about the story because it doesn't build it. And that's part of the thing. In a Valley of Violence, you build the story of why this character acts this way, what his revenge is about. In Babylon 5, you build the story arc of the entire show. And that's what this first season is. We're in the building stage. And it's hard to watch the building stage because it's so long. It's not just 30 minutes of a movie.
Yeah, and with this show, it's a little bit especially difficult because of the problems with the production.
The restraints they had.
Yeah, the restraints they had. But let's kind of just, I want to do something that we really didn't talk about doing, but let me just name a few key episodes here. There's not a whole lot of them, but let me just get your thoughts on it, spoiler free as far as the future goes, but just tell me what you think. The very, very first episode, Midnight on the Firing Line. Kind of give me your feelings on that one.
It's okay. It's got some great moments that really develop the story arc. As I pointed out earlier, there's stuff that happens with Londo and stuff in it that plays in like way down the road. And it has some cool moments. It's not the funnest. I've watched it numerous times. It's not my favorite, definitely not, but it's a good first episode. It's definitely better than the pilot.
Yeah, definitely better than the pilot. I will say that. I gave the episode a 7.75, and it very much deals with Jakaar, the Narn, Centauri, and Londo. I mean, it is. I mean,
It's
brings
setting
you into the
up
world.
that history of the conflict.
Yes, and I think it's a very good episode, and you get the whole Jakaar as the bad guy kind of supervillain kind of thing in the beginning of this one. Like I said, he will change as the show goes on, but you get that in the very, very first episode. And it's a very political episode.
It brings us into the council, talks about how it's basically a second pilot kind of for the show. That is telling us what's going on. We have conflict. This is how we deal with it. These are the races. Everything like that. It tries to make sure I think all the players are in that episode.
Yeah.
You have the meeting with Talia and Ivanova.
And speaking of that, I mean, you have some issues with, especially when you were watching the show and you were texting me about this episode and that you hadn't seen this character for a few episodes.
Oh, that was such a struggle. Yeah, we haven't talked about this in a long time because I fell in love so much. But I did struggle very much in the first season, feeling like we have so many characters that don't get enough time to shine. They're not, but if they're in an episode, most of the time they play a decent role in it. But there's times you'll go 3-4 episodes without seeing a character. And Talia is one of them.
Talia is a big one.
Talia
and
is
then
a very
Jakaar
big one.
towards the end of the season, you don't see a lot of him either.
Yeah, she's the main one, and we get this introduction to her that's going to play a pivotal role with her and Ivanova and their relationship. But as far as like the episode itself, it does a good job, I guess. It does what it needs to do.
All right, so I'm skipping way ahead because there's a lot of episodes that are just kind of one-offs and just character-building episodes. But let's go straight to, episode 13, the name of the season, Signs Importance. How did you feel about Signs Importance? First time you watched it as opposed to now.
Best secondary character in the show comes in this episode, and that is Mr. Morden. He becomes phenomenal. His first appearance, you'll love him. If you don't love him from the get-go, I mean, I don't know.
And this is the episode that sets up our main storyline for the entire show.
There's a weird scene in this episode that really bothers me. I have to say it. It involves Delenn and like this weird when she meets Mr. Morden.
That one, they did that, but it never came to fruition.
It was one of them stories.
They just forgot about.
It's something that I was talking about earlier, and it really bothers me, and I had to point it out because I'm like, what? But it's one of the only weak points of the episode. It's one of the stronger episodes in the season, for sure.
Definitely. I love that episode. And like I said, it sets up your whole main arc for seasons 2, 3, and 4. It all comes in, and Signs Importance gives you, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what's coming. Just to kind of give you an idea. And they just give you a little taste. Like you're at a Sam's Club and you're getting little samples. That's all you get. But it teases you for more. And then the next episode you get is like nothing to do with that.
Yeah, it's the struggle of the first season.
Yeah.
It's not as serialized as the rest of the show was. But this is where you start to build the main story arc. I would say the main story arc of the show.
All right, so let's jump to episode 18 and 19. It was the first two-parter in the show, A Voice in the Wilderness.
I don't really have much to say about this. I actually did just watch this the other day. I threw in that whole disc and went through them. It's got some great things that become very important, obviously, in the show.
But the main importance of it, this planet that they're orbiting, that Babylon 5 is orbiting, becomes alive, and they have to investigate. There could have been so much more, and I think there was supposed to be more dealing with that in the future, but it never came out. I think this is one of those storylines that just kind of got written out, forgotten about.
Well, not
there should have
completely,
been so much
but
more. I mean, they brought it up, but it was never as important
it becomes
as it should have been.
Yeah, like the way it was teased never reached its fruition, but the planet holds its place in the story arc that's very important. So, the next episode, though, that we're going to talk about...
Episode 20, Babylon Square.
Which is my favorite episode of the season, hands down. It's great. It's such a unique episode. I think I remember realizing it at the time how important it was going to be into the show and how much I liked it. And it introduces one of my favorite characters in the show.
Zathras.
I don't even want to spoil the character. If you don't love Zathras as a character,
you're wrong.
Then you're just wrong. He's the best. There's not much more you can say. He becomes so minor because you don't see him for again, and I think he has like 3 appearances after this. But it's the most impactful for me of all the secondary characters. So, like, even more than Mr. Morden, even more than any other characters you're going to meet in the show, because other ones will come up. This is the one that's for me.
And with Babylon Squared, I think I told you when you were first watching the show, and I know I definitely told my wife when she was watching the first season of the show, that Babylon Squared is one part of a 3-part story that is the most important story in the whole show. You have your main arc. This is kind of a secondary arc compared to that, but it's kind of related. It's so important. And when you watch this episode, it's
related to the main arc.
Yes, it is. And they do a very good job of not really showing you how important it is. You get one scene where you're like, okay, that was weird, at the very, very end. But they don't show you how important this is. But it's not until the 3rd season that you find out how important this episode is. It's a great episode when you've seen the show once through, and you're like, oh man, this is awesome. But when you're watching it for the first time,
it was my favorite in the season for the first time.
Really?
I loved it because
mine.
It was part of that same, like, we're building the world.
Yeah,
and that was what I loved.
And just so you know, you think, why do they call it Babylon 5? Why didn't they call it Babylon 6 or Babylon 2 or whatever? Well, you get to find out that part of the story too. And especially in Babylon Squared, that becomes very apparent. They do mention it, I think, on Midnight on the Firing Line in the first episode. But, Babylon stations, something happened to Babylons 1, 2, and 3. And then something different happened to Babylon 4. And then now we're on the last Babylon stations, Babylon 5. And you get to find out about one of the Babylon stations in Babylon Squared.
Exactly.
All right, so then we'll just go to episode 22, the last episode of the season, Chrysalis.
Yeah, this episode is often rated by, we obviously like to read what other people think because we're interested. I see a lot of people who rate this as the best episode of the season. I can't agree. I mean, it's a pretty decent episode. It's got some great moments, but at the end of the day, it's not my favorite.
Okay, well, Chrysalis, it really gives you another part. There's 2 main arcs. I mean, there's one main arc throughout the show, and then there's a secondary.
Was that
main
a main arc?
Main arc, and then there's a secondary main arc, and then there's a smaller arc. Like Babylon Square is like a secondary arc that pertains to the main arc. I hope you're following this out there.
I'm not even following this, and I know what's going on.
But there's another arc that becomes very, very important in the series, and that really comes full circle in Chrysalis. It's a Garibaldi episode. It has, a lot of the other characters in it. Londo is very important in it. I think Jakaar is very important in this episode as well.
Kind of. We've kind of built up to the season. It's the season finale. We've built up to what's going on here. There's a great thing with going on with Delenn and Sinclair. Like, there's so many stories. Like, obviously, since we're trying not to spoil anything, we can't really explain them. But there's a lot of stories going on in this at the same time. It builds to it. I wouldn't say it's a combination of everything from the season, but there's definitely a lot of things that have happened being brought up.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that you really see with Babylon 5 is that they don't just have one main arc. You have one main, yes, but there are other very, very important arcs. We mentioned the Psy-Corps.
Is there only
earlier.
one thing going on in your life? I mean,
no, yeah,
exactly.
and this show does a very good job of giving us multiple stories from lots of different places, and you get episodes about them in the first season, and they kind of just, it's so hard not to spoil everything. I know when we do season 2, we got to worry about we don't have to worry about spoiling the season, because either you've watched season 1 and you know what's going on in season 2, or you're not listening at all and it doesn't even matter. But
Yeah, there's no way.
Season 1, we want you to watch the show, but we don't want to give anything away because the surprise is part of the journey.
There's no way I'm not talking about what happens in the story in Season 2.
Yes, it's amazing, the journey. So if you've watched, you got to watch Season 1. Just watch it.
Like, if you think the idea of a show where you build characters and a world and you have complex situations with moral overtones like any good sci-fi show should be representing, I think that's one thing that anyone would say about any sci-fi show. It's meant to represent or reflect us as people, reflect our beliefs, the way we think, our hopes, our dreams. This show represents all that could be possible for humanity and how our strengths show when we're later, but also we've learned from our weaknesses and the problems we have, and how we would relate that to other races, i.e. kind of what we kind of need to do here on Earth, to learn to relate to each other as people. This is a show that shows how hard it can be and the complications that go with that. And obviously it's sci-fi, it's fantasy, it's fantastical in its perception of who we are as people. We always have this belief that we're going to turn out great, and then the world around us happens. And I like that this show makes it hopeful. It's just like how Star Trek was. We have this future that we could truly want to live up to, and look what we bring to the table. Look how we can benefit the universe. And you develop these characters, and I mean, I can't say what's going on in the story, but it's so beautiful how it pans out. If you made it through the show, you would be horribly dissatisfied if you didn't understand where these people came from at the beginning. You have to know who they were.
You have to watch the first season.
Yeah, you have to know who they were to make who they become and where the show goes.
So let me ask you a question here. Now, when I was first selling this show to you, now the way it worked is I had fallen in love with Babylon 5. You were starting to really get into Game of Thrones. And we made a deal that you would watch the first season of Babylon 5 if I watched the first season of Game of Thrones.
And we agreed.
We agreed.
And we started. And
even though Babylon 5 was way longer than Game of Thrones, you agreed because, I was very, very passionate about this.
We were talking, and then by the time we finished the first season, before we even finished the first season of each,
we both agreed to watch.
We would do the shows.
Yes.
We'll stick with the shows.
I just recently had a kid, so season 6 of Game of Thrones I still got 3 episodes left to finish it. But do you remember you asked me a question? You said, is it a story-driven show or a character-driven show? And I had the hardest time answering that because it really is both. And it can't be both.
Well, and I think I understand why you can say that. I do feel, if I had to peg it now that I've watched the show, it is a story-driven show. Where the stories, because each character has an episode, but they develop each character, but the stories individually and as a whole are what really draw me into it. Maybe it's partially because the actors aren't as strong as something you would see in Game of Thrones, or any of those more modern highbrow shows. But it does have both. Yes, obviously the characters develop. And
there is an argument
they're consistent.
Made
they're consistent
for
with
a character-driven show. If you just look at the character arcs of Delenn and Londo and Jakaar, there's an argument to be made out there that this is a character-driven show.
Yeah.
But there is a story arc that it probably takes a little bit of precedent over the character-driven because the characters react to so that they react to the story, and you could probably say, well, they're secondary to the story, but it's still, they're both right there.
If to bring it back to what you were saying and finish that thought, I love Game of Thrones because I love the characters. The show has problems that I could discuss at any point if we ever get into it. But I love the characters and who they are and how well-rounded they are. What I love about Babylon 5 is the story. And the characters are great. Obviously, as I stated, Delenn is one of my favorite characters in all television shows that I've watched. But for me, the story arc is what draws me in. And you can't really see it when you're watching the first season until you look back at it later. If you like the show, I tell people, if you make it through episode 3 or 4 of the second season and you're not all in at that point, then I can understand dropping out. Because the second season amps it up. But it wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't, by the time you were 2-3 episodes in, you wouldn't have been able to make me so interested if you hadn't built up everything to this point.
So, and, I love Babylon 5. And like I said, the first season is difficult to get through. But if you can, just sit back, take the time, and understand that it's going to get better. It is definitely going to get better. And when it does, you're going to be very, very happy that you watched this show. I want you to give it a shot. I'm telling you out there now, like I said, I was excited about doing this podcast because I couldn't wait to talk about my new favorite show. And as far as my shows go, Star Trek is number one. I don't know. I think I would probably pick Stargate second because it just has so much more universe.
And it's got a history.
Because you're only looking at 5 seasons of Babylon 5, Crusade, 1 season of that. It's like a half a season.
And some movies.
Yeah, and then some movies, some TV movies. But Stargate has so much more, but Babylon 5 is already right up there in the top 3.
Yeah, I do you remember how I pointed out, like, it was added to that list of shows. It's up there with Star Trek, with Buffy, with Doctor Who for me.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of them shows that quickly earned its place.
And I go through and I rate every single episode. For me, like a 7.5 is average. And as far as the episodes go in this show, it ended up getting a 7.60. So a little bit above average, not too much. But it's right there with some really good shows. It bested every first season of Star Trek for me except for Voyager. So I love the show. And in that 7.60, there's some high-rated shows. I think the highest rated I got was 8.75. But there's some low ones, some ones that dip down into the 6s. And anything below a 7.25 is about below average. And then everything below that is, kind of weak. So I have some ones that are 6.5, 6.75. So it kind of runs the gamut. It's really hard to kind of nail the show down. So I get 7.60 is respectable.
So, well, since we're talking about the episodes, let's just talk about it. And we like to do top 5 lists. We like to talk about...
Everybody knows this. We do a top 5 list every episode.
Yeah, so
By the way, you better start thinking about your pick of the week or whatever. I don't know if you have one of those down.
I'll come up with something.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to do my top 5 episodes of the show, and the first one I'm going to go with is going to be Deathwalker. And Deathwalker is going to be the 9th episode of the show. I gave it a rating of an 8.25, and you get to explore the Dilgar War. This is something that it is a basis for the show, but you don't really get a whole lot of information because it happened years before the Earth Minbari War, and this is what basically made Earth a presence in the world, and you get the last of the Dilgar. And this is a very much a Star Trek story. And there's just so much morality and stuff like that in there. It makes you think. It makes you It's a good episode. 8.25.
It's an top episode. Actually, it almost made, because I'm doing my list a little differently. It's the only time I'm going to do this for Babylon 5, but because the first season is so weak, and we always do top 5 lists, and we always do the same list, I kind of wanted to go a different direction, so I made my top 5 bottom episodes. So the first one I'm going to give is going to be not my least favorite, but from the season, but number 5, like the 5th worst episode in my opinion. And Deathwalker was close to being on my list of worst episodes.
I don't know how
it was a great story. It was another example of a great story idea that did not play out on screen for me. Poor performances, whatever you
Is that your number 5?
No.
Okay. Don't talk trash about Deathwalker.
My number 5 is going to be something we actually mentioned earlier. It's Infection, which was the 4th episode of the season. This is the one that has the actor who plays Ducky from NCIS in it. It's a cool episode. Idea about this weapon that this guy snuggles, is an artifact from an archaeological study that they find on this planet that's dead, and it turns out it's this weapon that destroyed the planet. It's a great idea about how people can weapons we create can destroy us. It's really relevant to our world because that's something we deal with in our lives. And it's another example of there's a great idea, great speech at the end, but a horrible execution. The creature looked awful. Like
The acting was kind of bad.
it was bad.
I gave it a 7.
It was not a great episode. That's my number 5, fifth worst episode.
Okay, so then I'm going to go to my number 4, best episode. I'm going to go to the last episode of the season, Chrysalis. Chrysalis, I gave it an 8.5. It's when you watch the show for the first time, it's not really that great.
It really isn't.
No.
I was so let down. I was like, this is the season finale.
Yeah, but when you know what's going to happen in the future, it makes it so much better. And Chrysalis is a key part of the story, and seeing all the little details about how things happen. When I watched it again for the second time, I didn't rate it when I went through the first time, just the second time. I definitely got to give it an 8.5 and my number 4 episode of the entire season.
Well, there you go. So my number 4 worst episode of the season is an episode called Mind War, which is the first time you meet Bester, which is Walter Koenig.
Koenig.
Yeah,
Chekhov
from
the original series of Star Trek.
It's his first appearance, fantastic appearance.
He's part of the Psi Corps.
He's part of the Psi Corps. It's about a rogue telepath. It's got lots of problems.
There was definitely something I liked about the episode. I gave it a 7.25, below average still, but I mean there was something better definitely than Infection.
Yeah, it was better than Infection. No, you're wrong. It was weak. Infection had a cool idea. This one, I mean, it was just bad acting, bad everything.
All right, so my number 3 episode, best episode of season 1, is going to be your favorite episode of season 1, and that's Babylon Squared. Again, with Chrysalis, you don't really love this episode unless you know what's going to happen in the future. I know what's going to happen in the future, and this is a great episode. I think I gave it, and I gave it an 8.5. Same rating as I gave Chrysalis, just it's a little bit better.
Yeah, and obviously I made it clear it was my favorite episode of the season, and Zathras. So my next one, number 3, is one that I was watching it recently. I was like, this has got to be my least favorite of the season. And then it turned out it wasn't, because it had some moments that weren't that bad. But it's called Survivors. It's this story. It's a Garibaldi episode about this person he was really close with, and now she's kind of out to get him and stuff like that. And they were like close, like family. Really bad acting on the part of the guest star.
Definitely.
And made it seem like there was this really important person, and we never see them again. Another thing that kind of just disappeared from the first season.
It's more just character building for Garibaldi.
Character building. We discover his alcoholism and things like that in this episode. A little bit of history about why he's kind of considered having a checkered past. But I was so disappointed by the execution of the episode.
I think that was my 3rd least favorite episode. I gave it a 6.75 as well. It wasn't that great. And most of it was the acting. The story wasn't too bad, but the acting was pretty bad, especially from a guest star.
Yep, those should be better.
And you will find that with Babylon 5, the guest stars are usually pretty terrible.
I don't know. There's been a lot of big people. I mean, we were talking about Lucille was on here. I don't think she was in this season. Lucille from Arrested Development, Jessica Walters. She guest stars on an episode.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a lot of guest stars in this show that actually end up, I think, doing a good job.
So I'm going to go to my number 2, and this is the episode where, for my birthday, I can do whatever I want. Everybody comes over, and I can show them or do whatever I feel like I want to do because it's my birthday. And I wanted everybody to watch this episode.
And I wish you. This almost made my list as well.
Jeez.
I was like, this was a bad choice for me.
I love this episode, and there's a lot of people out there that hate this episode. And it's the episode called Believers, and it's the 10th episode of the season, and it's a very Star Trek type episode. But everybody's like, oh, it doesn't end like a typical Star Trek episode, blah, blah, blah. You know what? Watch The Enemy from the third season of Next Generation, and this is a very, very similar episode to that. Different storylines, obviously, way different, but there's a similar storyline there, and it's early season Babylon 5. The acting isn't great, but the story is really good.
It was another
waste.
It was another wasted potential that just the execution kind of turned me off. I thought this would have been so much. This could have been so much better, and it's
all an episode of a religion versus science. And I thought it was great.
It was such a good idea for me. I wish I could have got on board with it.
Yeah, and you're wrong.
And well, I don't know what else to say because we can just disagree.
All right.
So my number 2 least favorite episode, second worst episode, arguably one of the worst episodes of the show. I'm going to go with TKO, which a lot of fans consider the worst episode of the entire series. It's a Garibaldi episode, a boxing guy. It's like a bad episode of Arena, the movie. Oddly, that stars Claudia Christian. But I don't know what to say. It's so horrible. I would actually say you might even skip this one if you're watching the show for the first time. If you skipped it it wouldn't be the end of the show.
And I think that's my least favorite episode of the show, TKO. There's another episode that they both have a 6.5, but I think TKO for me is the worst episode of the season.
Yeah.
And like most fans agree, worst episode of the show.
Yeah.
All right, so my number 1 episode, and it's very, very arc-driven, is Signs of Importance. I gave that episode an 8.75, so right below, great level. 9 is great. 8.75 is, right on the cusp there, and that all has to do with the arc that is introduced into this, and, having seen the show already, that factors heavily into it, but even, my wife watching it for the first time, she's like, oh, I can see already this stuff's important. So we went through and she's like, oh, I want to see what happens with this. I want to see what happens with this. And then actually the next episode after that is TKO. And she was kind of let down because of that. But Signs of Importance is amazing. It is the best episode of season 1. That's why they named the season after it.
Well, while I can't agree with it being the best episode of the show, it is in my top 5.
Not show, season.
Excuse me, the top episode of the season. It is in my top 5 of the season, probably my top 3. But just it's better for world building than a standalone episode, even though it is a good standalone episode as well.
Yes. So your number 1 worst episode of the season? My
worst episode of the season, probably the show, actually, in my opinion, is an episode called Grail. Grail is about a guy searching for the Holy Grail, and there's this horrible story about whatever, another guy who's caused all these problems on other Babylon stations. Jinxie, that's the name. And it's just
Jinx.
Horrible performance. There's even I forgot the actor, the notable guest star, who actually you would probably recognize.
And he's the reason why I gave this episode a 7.5.
You gave it a 7.5?
David frickin' Warner is the guy searching for the Grail in this episode. I don't remember what his character name is. But yeah, Jinxie is terrible. But David Warner makes up so much ground on that terribleness. There's some bad stuff in the episode, but David Warner is so amazing, man. I just cannot give this episode a terrible rating because he is so good in the episode and he's so earnest. And
were you surprised that was my?
I am. A lot of people think Grail is one of the worst episodes of the series. David Warner is freaking top notch, and if you give this rating below a 7, into a bad range, I just cannot agree with that because he brings so much gravitas into the part, and his performance alone is great.
Worst episode. So, having said that, if we have any final thoughts about the show, my way I would describe the final thoughts on, not the show necessarily, but the first season as a whole. It's work, but it's probably the most profitable work I've ever had as far as a show, where I had to struggle. Trek is a part of my life, so I never had to worry about really struggling with watching new stuff on that. and most of the time when I watch a show, I'm not going to give it more than like a little bit. I mean, 22 episodes is a lot, and I struggled. But by the end of the first season I was in, I loved it, and I was 100% sold by the 5 episodes into the second season. I think it's something that's one of the most beneficial things. Like, what was the term I used a second ago? I think I nailed it on the head. The best work, like the most profitable work I've ever had as far as the show.
We have tried, as I mentioned before, we have tried and tried to get people into the show. Our father thinks that, it's too fantasy, which is, he's so far from the truth, it's not even close. Our other brother, he thinks, it was, look at the special effects, it was cheap, this and that. He doesn't give it a second chance. There's so many people out there that we've tried to get this show into, that we've tried to, to tell them how great it is, and they don't want to listen to us. They try, a few episodes, maybe 1 or 2, and they give up. And I'm telling you that the journey is better than the destination. And when you watch Babylon 5, the journey is totally worth it. It's rough in the beginning, yes. We've already discussed how the season was just finding its legs. It was an entirely new type that they were doing at the time, and this whole introducing the world thing for the whole first season, probably wasn't the best idea, but it pays off in spades when you get to the regular season. When you get to the main parts, 75%, stand alone in the first season and 25% arc. Then you get into the second season, it's about 50-50.
I would say maybe a little more than that.
Yeah, then you get to the third season and it's like 75 arc, 25%.
And every episode has almost every episode has some story arc.
Yes. And I'm telling you right now that this show is worth the effort. It's worth the pain of some of the bad acting. It's worth the pain of some of the bad special effects, especially on the DVD transfers. They
could have cleaned it up.
Oh yeah, it was pretty bad. The special effects did not look that bad on television back in the day. It was one of the first shows to use special effects, CGI special effects, because of their budget. So some of them aren't that great, but I'm telling you, it's worth the journey, and check it out. You gotta watch the first season first, and it's pain. It took me 2.5 months to get through 22 episodes, but by the end of that first season, I was in, and the second through the 5th season took me 2.5 months. I flew through those, despite working and all that other stuff that we do in our lives. Check it out. Fall in love with it, because we both did.
In Valen's name, I don't think you can say it any better.
All
right. We'll go how we finish every episode, our picks of the week. So my pick of the week this time is going to be something I was up for the Eclipse. I got the fortune a while back to go to watch the Eclipse, and that was quite amazing. And while I was there, I was hanging out with Johnny Rico, and he recommended a movie I had heard about, but I didn't get the chance to actually check out. It's a film called Edge of 17. It's a coming-of-age story about a girl, I think her junior year in high school, who's a little awkward, doesn't know how to fit in. Great performance by Haley Steinfeld, the lead actress, and Woody Harrelson was phenomenal in it. If you like teenage movies that are serious, if you're a John Hughes fan, I would even say this is a good choice. So,
typically on my pick of the week, I always try to make some correlation between this, my pick, and what we just discussed. But I'm going to go a little bit different this week, just because I've got to support the man. And I want you to check out Alice Cooper, Paranormal, the new album that just came out. It's his first album since 2011, I believe. It just came out. It's a great album. I love every song. Wow. There's a couple of weak ones, but for the most part, it's a great album.
It's not one of his best, but it's definitely a good album.
It's definitely a good album for somebody who's almost 70. So go check it out. That's Alice Cooper, Paranormal. So we'll talk to you later. Check us out on we're not on iTunes, I guess, yet. Podbean, YouTube. Check us out on our Facebook page. we'd love to hear from you. So submit anything you want on our Facebook page, and then check us out and just keep viewing us.
I tell you what, if somebody actually submits an idea that sounds good to them, we'll at least try to. We'll mention it, try and figure out some way to talk about it. Maybe even if it's good enough, do something about it.
Hey, if you put out an idea that you want to put on our show, we might even make an entire episode out of it. At least bring it up. I can promise you that. We're just looking for listeners out there. That's all we want. We're independent podcasters. We don't get any money from this. We just do it for the fun of it. So if you're listening and you enjoyed this show and you want us to maybe discuss something that you're thinking of, pop on the Facebook page, send us a message, just put a post on there, whatever you want. I know most of the people who are listening to us are people we know, so just text us, let us know, and we will bring you up on another future episode. Do you have any other things you want to say?
The eclipse was awesome. If you've never seen an eclipse, go see a total eclipse. You've never seen a real eclipse if you haven't seen a total eclipse.
And perfect for a science fiction show to end it that way. Thank you.
Go away or I shall taunt you a second time.